And yet another book I've decided to abandon, or rather decided to admit that I've abandoned. I actually haven't read this book now for over a year, so time to admit finally that I'm not going to finish it. The book is Children Learning English by Jayne Moon. I picked up this book as part of the Delta Module 3. Delta Module 3, those of you who are English teachers will be familiar with it. You have to pick a specialism and write about that specialism, research it, and design a curriculum for that specialism. I was doing young learners at the time, and now, actually, let me back up. The thing that most people will tell you about the Delta Module 3 is that you're not actually supposed to read books cover to cover. The reading list is too vast. You're supposed to have 5 or 6 sources for each section, and then there are multiple sections. And all of this is done on a time limit, of course. Most people do it within about 5 months or 6 months, depending on how much of a head start you get, but about half a year. And this is in addition to working full-time and all your other commitments. So you're not supposed to actually read books cover to cover. But I wanted to make a go of reading books cover to cover because I thought, I knew I couldn't read everything. But my thinking was, my specialism was young learners, and I was actually teaching a lot of young learners at the time, children around 8 to 12, which was what my specialism was. So I thought, okay, I'll just transfer my reading list, the reading I do in my spare time, over to material that is also useful for Delta Module 3, and I'll kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone there. But what ended up happening is, first of all, I was getting stressed out and distracted by other things. But secondly, there's just, I would start reading a book because it was useful for one section, and that was the section I was writing up that week. But because I'm such a slow reader, it can take me a month or something to finish a book. Then I'd move on to another section of the Delta Module 3, and I'd still be reading a book that was relevant to the previous section, and I'd be losing motivation to stick with it because it was no longer quite so useful for me, even though it was maybe useful for my professional development in the long term. And I ended up jumbling a lot of books. And so both this book and the book that I'll hopefully talk about tomorrow or sometime soon are books that I tried to read cover to cover when I was doing the Delta, and I just got distracted, and I never finished it. I did actually get one book read cover to cover, which was, what was the title of that one again? Teaching Young Language Learners by Anna Marie Pinter, which I read and reviewed on this weblog about 1.5 years ago now. We're coming up on 2 years ago almost now. Wow. But this book, I picked this up as a follow-up, Children Learning English by Jayne Moon. Now, the book by Anna Marie Pinter I actually did find useful on the Delta. I'm not sure it was a wise idea to read it cover to cover, but there was a lot of information there I was able to cite in my research for the Delta Module 3. This book, one of the reasons I picked this book up is because it does pop up on reading lists for Delta Module 3, specifically for the Young Learners Specialism. But I actually did not find it very useful for the Delta Module 3. I found it useful for teaching in general. There's a lot of good ideas on here. But it's almost all teaching suggestions and activity ideas. None of this, as far as memory serves, is grounded in research. It's just all her own ideas or ideas she's picked up around the staff room over the years. If it is based on research, it's not evident from reading through this. And so consequently, I actually did not find this useful in Delta Module 3. In fact, I was looking at my Delta Module 3 paper right before I filmed this video because I was thinking, I must have cited it once or twice, you know, just to pad my bibliography if nothing else. And I was doing the Control F search function for Jayne Moon, or just Moon, and couldn't find this book at all, which means I got almost all the way done with it, but then never cited any of that in my Delta Module 3. Which doesn't necessarily mean that you couldn't. I mean, maybe I wasn't trying hard enough to shoehorn this book in. But it wasn't the obvious choice. Or I couldn't find it didn't strike me as obvious when I was writing up the report and the curriculum. There wasn't like research shows young learners react like this or anything like that in this book. It was much more, this book is much more just anecdotal and her own ideas. Now, I should make clear as a caveat, actually, maybe I should back up and talk about my reading experience. I don't remember exactly how far I got into this book. I picked it up in, I believe, February of 2019, and I got some pages into it before I got distracted by other reading. And then I actually came back to it and started from the beginning again and read through it and got almost all the way through it. And I don't remember exactly what page I was on, but I think I was into chapter 9, which is really almost near the end of the book. I remember reading this page here. This was page 124. There are only, how many pages are there in this book? There are only like 179 pages. So I was like 50 pages away from finishing the thing. I should have just stuck with it, if for no other reason. Then I could say I finished it, and I could give it a review, and I could list it in my list of books I've finished and reviewed, which nobody cares about but me. But I'm the type of person who cares about that thing. Kind of feel productive by finishing off a book. So it naggles at me a little bit that I got so close to this book and didn't finish it. I got distracted by other things. I was, a couple things. One, as I mentioned before, I was moving on to other sections of the Delta Module 3, and I was panicking because I didn't really know a lot about curriculum design. And so I was transferring my leisure reading, or not leisure, but my spare time reading, spare time, quote unquote, to other books that dealt more with curriculum design, because I felt that's what I really needed for the Delta Module 3. Excuse me, my mouth is a little bit sore. This is not the best time to be making a video, but it's one of the few times I've got some peace and quiet around the apartment, so I'm going to try and take advantage of that and get some filming done anyways. The other thing is I was transferring departments at that time and going over to the teacher training department at my school, and was busy getting trained up for that, and then I was transferring some of my spare reading time to teacher training books and books more about like the CELTA teaching method. So between those two things, I just felt stressed out enough that even though I was so close to finishing this book, and I didn't abandon it intentionally. Like most books I abandoned, I thought to myself, I'm just setting it aside for a few days where I concentrate on this other stuff. And then those few days became a few more days and became a few weeks and a few months. And at this point, I have to admit that I'm never going to pick it up again. And unfortunately, enough time has gone by now that I really can't even comment very intelligently on the stuff that I've already read, because it was like a year and a half ago at this point, and it's very foggy in my brain. I only remember it in kind of general terms, and even to the extent I remember it in general terms, I'm not entirely sure I trust my memory. But I'm going to ramble on and try and make a video out of that anyways, because that's just what I do on this channel. Once I I had at one point an idea that I would finish this book off regardless of whether or not it ended up being useful for the Delta, because I was primarily teaching young learners at that time. But I've actually since switched jobs, and I'm now working in an English for academic purposes program primarily, and still teaching young learners on the weekends a little bit. But it's not my primary focus anymore, which is all the more reason why I would lose motivation to come back to this book. So I'm just going to leave it unfinished and admit that this is an abandoned book at this point. But what to say about this book? Well, actually, let me see if I can move this stack over. Such an unprofessional video. Okay, bear with me a little bit here. I'm going to change the camera here and go through some things. It's a photocopied version here, which you'll have to forgive. This is just how books exist in Vietnam. This is out of my school library, and kind of all the books at the school library look like this. The book is pretty reader friendly. It's got all these cartoons and graphics on it. I did find a little bit, though, as I was reading it, particularly, some of these pages maybe without the cartoons or graphics on it, that I remember having a hard time getting through this book because my eyes would just glaze over, and then I would have to go back to the beginning again and concentrate again. I mean, the graphics jump out at you, but the text I didn't always find so interesting. But, what do you expect with a book like this, huh? It's not pleasure reading, after all. Yeah, this Winnie the Pooh thing for a questionnaire for needs analysis, I actually nearly cited this in my Delta Module 3, except I found a similar thing in another book and cited that one instead. I made a few notes along as I was reading this book. Again, like I said, it's not really heavy on research, but there are a lot of really good ideas in here. I have to admit, I haven't used most of them in the classroom, but as I was reading them, I was constantly thinking to myself, oh, that does seem like a kind of good idea I can use. One thing I remember, she was talking about wheels on the bus. Here we go. The wheels on the bus, the famous children's song, and she was talking about how you can use this in the classroom and all the different activities you can do, where you start off with it's very highly scaffolded and then you gradually reduce support. So she's got the wheels on the bus song, and then she's got all these activities here that you can do with them, and you're supposed to kind of work out for yourself what's the ideal order of the activities, going from a way that gives the students a lot of support initially to kind of gradually reducing that support and making it more independent. And then the suggested answers are in the commentary, which is quite typical of the style of which this book is written. And I remember reading that and thinking to myself, boy, I have never thought about all the different activities you could do just with this one song. I mean, I've used the song before in my classroom, and I've typically just sang the song and done the motions and had the kids follow me along with the motions. Something very simplistic like that, but not all these different actions like, she narrates the song using the model, but to demonstrate the action of the wheels going around. With some prompting from the teacher, pupils sing the song together by themselves, making appropriate hand gestures, and just all the scaffolding you go through to get it to the point where the kids are singing the song themselves and making the hand gestures themselves. Divides pupils into groups. Each group sings a different verse. Asks pupils to come out and turn the wheels of the bus round where she sings the song. She gets pupils to recall the song by using the hand gesture as cues. I just thought that was very good about how she took this simple song and made this whole extended lesson out of it. At other points, my comments got a little bit more frustrated. At this point, this is my comment here. I said, this is just meaningless platitudes. It's not practical. And what I meant by that is she's talking about how you can support children, but it's talking about how you can support children in very general ways. So to improve the chance of transfer, we need to make explicit to children, model, and state very clearly to them the procedures and strategies necessary for doing activities. And I thought, well, it would be nice to have a little bit more direction on exactly how to do that to children in the classroom, because without that, it's just kind of saying, it's just kind of a little bit too general without really any guidance about how to practically do this. Here I've got a sentence underlined. It says, if my teacher says a sentence in English and I don't understand, I think back to the last time she said it and what she said it meant. This is something that you'd want a student to work out how to support themselves. I put, what? That's just too simplistic to expect a child to do that. Here she's talking about the need to adjust support. And the classic thing that usually gets cited in ESL books like this is Vygotsky. Here she's essentially got Vygotsky's theories, but doesn't cite Vygotsky. So she's deliberately avoiding putting all the theorists and all the research and all the big names and just giving more practical advice, which I thought was very typical of how the book was written. Even though I criticized it just on the previous page for not being practical. I guess that's a little bit mixed messages here, huh? Well, it's mostly practical, but sometimes she resorts to platitudes. There was a couple other things I underlined which aren't really illustrative of anything, but I just thought they were interesting. And where were they again? Bear with me a second. I've got them underlined, but I don't have the page flagged, so I have to just flip through this here to find the section I've underlined. Oh yeah. So this really has nothing to do with any deeper theory or anything, but I just thought this was interesting. This is a dialogue that she has of a teacher talking to several students to illustrate, what is this illustrating again? How the teacher can show interest in the students' lives. So he's talking to the students, and teacher says, eating food, good. Let's hear from Eugen. And he says, on Sunday, Gilchin's mother beat Gilchin. And the teacher says, oh, Gilchin. Smiles at Gilchin and sounds sympathetic. Okay, let's see from Kisang. Yesterday I saw Dorji. And I marked that with an exclamation point there because I thought, what? And I don't know. I mean, granted, this is not the main point of this section, but you can imagine this child, Gilchin, this cry for help. He's like, teacher, on Sunday my mother beats me. And she's like, oh, Gilchin. Okay, let's move on and hear from Gesang. And I as I was reading this part of the book, I pictured to myself, imagining Gilchin's face as he realized the teacher wasn't actually going to help him and was moving on to the next student. Now, I think obviously the way that, the sympathetic way to read this, the charitable way to read this, is that everybody in the room understood that this was a joke. And probably that is the way that it was, because why would you write it up in your book otherwise? But it just seems a little bit strange to me to write that up in the book, because when you just put it as a dialogue like this, you completely lose the intonation and the context and the nonverbal signals and stuff like that, and all you'll have is the words. And based on the words, it looks like a student is trying to tell the teacher that his mother is beating him. And then she's just like, oh, Gilchin. Smiles at Gilchin and sounds sympathetic. Okay, let's hear from Kisang. When I was reading this book, I was still working in a staff room at my school at that point, and pointed this out to several of my coworkers, saying, "What do you make of this dialogue? How do you think the teacher reacted here?" And got a lot of raised eyebrows from other people in my staff room there. Aside from that, yeah, I regret to say I really can't talk intelligently about this book. What I wish I would have done is made this video a year and a half ago when it was still fresh in my mind. But for the moment, all I can really say is I had attempted to read this book at one time. I gave up on it halfway through, not even halfway through, about 50 pages from the end, almost made it through the end, and have now decided that I'm not going to finish it. And so add this book to my list of abandoned books.